Welcome to Defense Disrupted. My name is Ian. I am joined by an extraordinary leader that's going to tell us stories from all across the world. Keith, welcome to Defense Disrupted.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks to Turbine One, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, you used to go by a different name. We're going to talk a little bit about your background. I do believe at one point you were a major general. How many years of service did you have in uniform, sir? It was mostly Army time. Is that right?
Mostly Army time. I've always gone by Keith, frankly, and I think I wrapped up a little over 33 years. Kind of depends on. I was commissioned in summer 1991.
Let's go back to that commissioning. I want to hear a little bit about you, and then we're going to talk about some of the extraordinary things that you have seen and led. I do believe, sir, we went to the same undergrad. We're both graduates from Georgetown School of Foreign Service. First question for you. Back when I was there, SFS at Georgetown was also known as Safe from Science, because there was no science requirement for all of us politics nuts. And it was also known as the School of Freaking Supremacy, because we were all a little annoying in the general ed classes. We all thought we knew more than the college folks or the nursing students for whatever reason. So was the culture like it for you back then in the late 80s, early 90s? Or did we just become a bunch of jerks in the early 2000s?
So yes to the first, yeah, on the science side of the house. No to the second. But no, yes, that's right. That was my commissioning source, Ian. Did the ROTC program there. A great program. And from there, launched into my Army career.
I was ROTC as well. I was there. I was a senior in college when 9/11 happened, and that's my call to service a few years later. Your call took you in many different directions. You have served in places that are right now taking rockets. You have been in intel community supporting organizations like DIA, and you've spent a hell of a lot of time overseas, where places like Ukraine and others that continue to be in an area of active combat. I want to ask you about how those markets, those areas of operation, those battlefields are operating today, get your sense of what's being disrupted. But maybe we start more in the early parts of your career. How have you seen so many different aspects of that international work? Were you in Intel the whole time? Do you consider yourself an Intel officer? How do you describe that arc of your 33 plus years?
Thanks for the question. So I've really been fortunate to have the opportunity to do three different things in the Army, if you will. So I was commissioned as an infantry officer, and in the infantry, basically, you get really good at carrying heavy things long distances to do a thing, right? Could be a raid, could be an ambush, could be defense. And then at about the 6 or 7 year mark, I tried out for and was selected for the U.S. Army Special Forces. So 10 Special Forces Group. In that time frame, this is probably mid to late 90s. This was, think Bosnia, think Kosovo, those scenarios just leading up to that inflection point, which was 9/11. But this Special Forces side of the house and a variation in the infantry is essentially you're still carrying heavy weight long distances, but now you're teaching partners and partner forces to carry heavy weight long distances as well to do a thing. And then the third element of my career, shortly after 9/11, and this, Ian, really merged both my undergraduate, that foreign service background, and my first 10 years, 13 years in the Army, which was combat arms, infantry, special forces. So I went the foreign area officer route. So not carrying heavy things long distances, but still working with partners and allies to advance U.S. national security interests.
That is such a Georgetown thing, by the way, for those that don't know. To be an FAO, foreign area officer, is if there's ever some kind of I don't know what the word is, cultural stereotype of, the young student thinking of joining the CIA someday or something like, I think the military version of that is maybe it'll be an FAO. I think there was a lot of Georgetown folks that professionally had daydreams for such type of work. And so in a way, I don't know if that was your experience in your ROTC class, but I think there was a lot of folks that were curious about that. Wanted to better understand what that was like. And so it almost seems for me, it was like, oh, of course you went there. That makes so much sense, having lived in that world for a little bit. But I got to say, the 10 Special Forces Group, I don't know what it is about that unit. In the past month, I've heard more extraordinary stories of transformational innovations and disruption coming out of the Army's 10th Special Forces Group. What is it about that unit? I'm a Navy guy. I didn't know that was a storied unit the way, whatever, the 82nd or in these World War II histories. How is it that unit has led to so many transformations in combat? Is it just where they happen to work? I mean, it's special operations, but even then, they seem like there's at least one movie about SEAL Team 6. I don't know if there's a head special forces group Tom Clancy novel, but I think there should be. What is it about that unit that led to such transformations?
So I would zoom out a bit. It's not just 10 Special Forces Group, it's all those Special Forces groups. And it goes down to kind of one of my things too, is the concept of small teams of assessed people who have volunteered not once, not twice, but in many cases 4 or 5 times. And I think, especially if they're well led and resourced, I mean, a special forces team on paper is 12 people, right? Rarely, at least in my time, did you have that many. But you've got folks with different backgrounds who are given hard problems and they're expected to solve it one way or the other. And whether that's fifth group, third group, seventh group, 10th group, they all kind of have that model to a degree. Now, I would say 10th group may be a little bit different, and because of the Cold War days, honestly, it was
Uh-oh.
Golden Gap. It was in that each group is more or less aligned geographically. So they were focused on 10th group is still focused on kind of the European theater. Although in this day and age, especially after 9/11, it didn't matter what your geographical alignment was. You were going to go where the problems needed to be solved.
Well, let's talk more about that geography. For those that are on the podcast, they may not see the video visual of a flag behind your right shoulder. That seems to be a overlay of the American flag when it appears to be Ukrainian flag. I have a hunch you know a bit about the Ukrainian fight. I have well covered, well studied, but a lot. Your point about small teams makes me think about troops and trenches. It makes me think about a phrase I learned that Ukraine, in many ways, is World War I and World War III at the same time. So let's go a bit into that geography and that the new war versus the Cold War. We're at a moment now when AI is transforming every battlefield. Was there, from your perspective, to the extent you could share it, AI on the Ukrainian battlefield in the beginning of that recent conflict?
I think at the beginning, probably not. Right. I think at the beginning, if you're honest, you've got two militaries that were very much legacy militaries in some ways. This is the Russian force that came in, and a lot has been written and talked about probably the degree of unpreparedness that they expected or had because they expected this to essentially be a cakewalk. And I think you'll also find that the Ukrainian military wasn't kind of up to where it needed to be. So day one, and for the Ukrainians, and I think they're right, this didn't start in February 2022. This was 2014. This was Crimea. But for our purposes, if we talk about 2022 as the start point, these are two kind of militaries that aren't really embracing technology in a way, but certainly on the Ukrainian side, they understand they are going to have to get after it and get after it quickly because they recognize their number one shortcoming really was manpower and munitions. There just wasn't enough 1.5. You saw expenditure rates of 155 that we hadn't seen, to your point, since World War II. And then there was a manpower discrepancy. So when you have those issues and you graft on top of that the existential threat that Russia posed, certainly in the Ukrainian mindset, if we say that necessity is the mother of invention, well, I think existential threat is the mother of innovation and defense innovation, right? So the Ukrainians, their human capital and their IT expertise and their STEM expertise was already there and latent. It even goes back to the Cold War time period. They were the intellectual bed, if you will, for engineering, for all. So they have that capacity. And so that just created an environment where I think the Ukrainians quickly read the room. They had the human capital, they had the urgency that all came together, not to mention the civil society, which was incredibly important in Ukraine to really fund, right? This is the capital stream. You can have the best ideas, but if you don't have a way to fund it and get it quickly. So that's where you just see this amazing, fast, you know, slap shot at times, just get it to the front, see if it works, because we don't have any other options given the threat.
That's a brilliant observation. I'm thinking through the supply chain of that. There's an interesting metaphor there in terms of, the Ukrainians' natural resources and then how they drove that forward in terms of tech innovation. And I think that's a good point about, it really started several years earlier, so they had a chance to ramp up and to some extent invest in those local strengths. Man, I feel like I just having a whole 5-hour conversation just about your lessons from Ukraine, but I want to recognize the moment the United States is in a set of combat operations, some say a war, in another part of the world that you also saw with direct personal observations. You were a senior defense official at attaché in Iraq, similarly in Abu Dhabi. Can you contrast that area of operations in terms of what you're seeing today against some of the nature of warfare in Ukraine? Is there any recognizing you're not in the fight in the same way that you used to be? You're watching the news like me. What do you see when you're contrasting one set of conflict versus another?
I think, and first I have to start with even on the Ukrainian observations that I've made, right? I come at this with a lot of humility. I am mostly more of a Middle East, North Africa person. I I did 7 months in Ukraine at the embassy, and just there's so much I don't know, but these are some of my observations. But to your point about comparing and contrasting, and I would flag too, my first real exposure to this was the 3 years I spent in Israel at Tel Aviv from 2014 to 17. So before the October 7th conflict, which is horrific, they had a similar conflict out of Gaza. It was called Protective Edge, Suketan. But that is where the Israelis really, I think, just a few years prior to that, they developed Iron Dome, which is their version of a Patriot, but highly effective in certain against certain munitions, a lower price point, and things like that. But the Israelis have been hyper focused on it, and there's also that supply chain, not the right term, but the proximity between the citizens of the country
Yeah.
and fight. That is also, I think, key as you look at how does defense tech get adopted so quickly. So this is where you might have an Israeli reservist on the weekends is with his Merkavat, armor unit, and then the rest he spends the rest of the week at Elbit or IAI. But and he's like, you know what? This doesn't work on this piece of kit. We got to re-engineer the software. Let's fix it. Saw that in Ukraine as well. In each one of those countries, I think the big contrast is the violence, the quantity and the time that the Ukrainians have had to endure this with a makeshift system of integrated air and missile defense, which has worked, but as we've seen, it bends significantly, almost breaks at times like this winter when the Russians go after critical infrastructure. Right. So that is kind of different. The even to this day, with what the Iranians are sending towards the Gulf and to Israel, still doesn't compare in terms of quantity and quality of inbounds. As sobering as that is, right? That is already a challenge for those countries. So I'll pause there.
No, no, I don't want you to pause. I have a theory I'd love to run by you, and with I recognize your humility, but I think I'm more of a student, so I'm going to say something. It may be dumb, and I'd love for you to be like, Ian, we're going to have you, but you missed it here. And here's my theory. My theory is that in the current Middle Eastern conflict, you talk about Iron Dome as an example. There is a level of integration with joint partners. America's partner in this case, active one, is Israel. The level of data integration, technology integration, very, very strong in an area of operation that I would say from a network level is uncontested. America owns the skies the way that we did in it looks from a domain perspective more like Afghanistan, whereas in Ukraine it is contested. You turn on your cell phone, you're going to get shot. And broadly, I'm at the risk of sounding political, NATO is not there in a formal sense. And so the data integration challenge is, hey, Ukraine, you're on your, you got to figure it out yourself. You're not doing, air defense shield integration with Poland the way that CENTCOM is doing with Israel, right? Like if that, those are the types of differences I'm seeing from an outside student of battlefields. And therefore it leads to different types of ways in which you fight, technology is used, partners participate, levels of intelligence sharing. Those are some of the differences I'm seeing. But again, I bounce it off of you to see if any of that is just misinformed. Am I reading the wrong news?
No, I'd love to push back on you on that, but I can't. That's it. I mean, it's just I think someone put it. We don't just have air superiority; we've got air supremacy. Right? This is we dominate, and that is such a luxury.
Close.
Pardon me. Yes,
Yeah.
in Middle
Yeah.
East,
Yeah.
not at all. It is highly contested, as we know in Ukraine. So I think that's a very valid observation. And if I could spin that out a bit to,
Sure.
we always talk about lessons learned, what can we learn? I think we got to be really careful in that. I think the number one lesson I would learn at this point from the conflicts both in the Middle East and in Ukraine is that future conflicts will look nothing like these conflicts. By which essentially, I mean, I could see a day where people look back with nostalgia about these conflicts, even the Ukrainian situation, because of the points that we made earlier. I would contend, you know, AI, the cyber, all those things that you, especially in the defense tech cutting edge, recognize are starting to appear and will only hockey puck in the near term. What AI is going to do to multi-domain operations is unbelievable, right? And I think we have not seen that even to a marginal degree today as compared to what the future will hold.
It's sobering. Yeah, man, I gotta say, I'm struggling to think about how much deeper to go into this because it's a hard topic. It's a difficult topic to think through. No one wants to have to be struggling through such combats, but I do want to take advantage more of your expertise in these areas. You know, a large part of your work has also been connected to the information that helps make decisions about such things. As a bit of a orthogonal point, how do you think about the human element of these operations? I think you have a large degree of work and history in the human intelligence space. Maybe not so much on the work itself, but how to understand the human decision making and the information and how much can come into a senior commander and the stress and anxiety of those serving at the front. You know, do you think that's changing, or is maybe the way we fight wars has changed, but the way we feel about it is exactly the same? Like, how do you think about that now with current operations compared to what you've seen from the past?
Yeah, I think in that regard, it's almost the amount of information and the pace of information that we see in our everyday lives that everyone's trying to figure out a way to cope with as individuals, as parents, as children. I think can be applied to the intel information side of the house. But if you'll indulge me for a moment, I think there's value in talking about that Intel ecosystem, if you will, because it's remarkable how the U.S. Does it to ultimately do two things: is to provide intel advantage to the warfighter, and in this case, Ian, the warfighters, the combatant commanders. We want to give them an intel advantage. The other aspect of that is we want to give decision advantage to the policymakers in the most senior leaders. So that's kind of the approach we always took. Now, within that, there are the collection side of the house, whatever the collection methodology is, right? It could be whatever sensor is out there. That sensor could be a human. And then there's the analytical community that takes all that information and then has the tradecraft and it's remarkable tradecraft to sit there and go through it and then make informed assessments for the consumer, which are those two entities I just talked about. I think all those things can, need, and will stay the same. I just think the speed, and this is where we talk about AI, at each one of those levels, AI is going to play a role.
Yeah.
And it's often at the interface, right? Between collector and analyst, between analyst and consumer, between collector and consumers. But back to the human element, I think that's still going to be an important aspect of all of this because even as we saw prior to lead up of the Iran situation right now, these are humans sitting down trying to figure out if there's a way to reconcile differences, if there's a way we can meet interests short of kinetic operations. And then that's one thing I always enjoyed going back to my undergrad years and having grown up and lived overseas a fair amount. Is like, hey, sitting down and having conversations with people, even if you don't agree on things, is really, really valuable. I think that's important.
Yeah. Your analogy and your phrasing of how all intelligence works is interesting. You know, in the language of these new AI craziness of agentic AI, we talk about data training, compression, and then action. Like you take the information in, you run it through the memory, and then some output comes out of it. But I can also say that's how it seems to be the biology of intelligence. There's the ints, human, SIGINT, or then there's a processing, and then there's the go make a decision off of it. It's like it feels like agentic AI is just trying to imitate what the defense intel world has been doing for decades. Is that am I misdiagnosing that?
You know about your side of the equation better than I do, but it sounds accurate, right? And I will tell you on that front end, what are those requirements that commanders and decision makers need in order to have the highest likelihood of success, or to confirm or deny that which they want to do is massively important. I mean, the framework that exists in the U.S. Intel community today is all kind of geared towards that. And it nests really well with things like national security strategies, national defense strategies. Right. So each entities have things that they need to know or would like to know in order to confirm or deny whether their plans, intentions are going to be successful, whether that's a negotiation, whether that's a combat operation.
To that point, maybe one more piece of your professional history I'd love to get into that we haven't talked about at all. I think you spent at least a couple of years at DIA. So that I think is probably a leadership role that connects to what you were just describing. Can you talk a little bit about that function and how that service was delivered? Why have a DIA? What does it do? What how does that fit into the ecosystem?
Yeah, good question. And I'm really glad you asked it because DIA is one of those organizations that I had never really spent significant time at until I was director for operations, deputy director for operations there for a couple of years. And the workforce there is absolutely exceptional. Their mission, this all source element, is absolutely remarkable, and they're so good at it. I always wondered why we didn't stand a little taller, our shoulders back, and our heads a little bit higher. But that I think speaks more to the humility and the fact that everyone realizes it doesn't matter what we did today. We still got to make sure we do what it needs to be done for tomorrow. If you look at any crisis out there, a military related one, DIA had a hand in the success of it. It would be my contention. If you look at Sudan civil war a few years back, and I won't go into too many details, but that was a whole of agency DIA effort with other partners, right? But there are 72 Americans who are out of Sudan as a result of a lot of hard work. And it wasn't all just on the fly, right? This is years that go into that. So that's that ecosystem. The good and what I two things about DIA that I don't think everyone realizes necessarily. The customer for DIA is the Secretary of Defense. And then on that warfighter side, all the combatant commanders. There's other elements in the intel community whose primary client or customer is the White House, right? And DIA can absolutely help people understand and frame that. But again, it's helping the secretary and then helping the war fighters, and then kind of everyone in between. But those are the principal customers and clients because that's what they do. They are focused on defense ultimately.
What is that? Can you teach me a little bit more about what that means? I mean, what does a combatant commander want to know that a White House doesn't? I mean, I guess the different customers, I get that, but I'm still thinking, is it just more specific, more tactical? Is it less political? Like I'm trying to understand that myself, even, and I don't like. I know about some of the. I've had my exposure to like a Mars system and things like it, and these kind of like target databases and things like it. But I don't really understand enough of how that is such a different customer. And the reason I'm asking is, do you think those are going to change in this tech-driven obsession of the next few years?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to change. And then back to the first part of your question is if you look at the combatant commander's responsibilities as the operational commander, that's the tranche of information that they really need to know and I think rely on DIA as well as the other intel agencies, DoD intel agencies, right? This is NGA. These are all the others that come together. But it's really how do I make sure I can fulfill my statutory requirements to be able to conduct the missions that I have signed up for in conversations with the secretary, with POTUS, and with the chairman. So that's the strategic, the policy, the political, the energy. There are other addresses who can help frame those for combatant commanders, and they're in separate conversations that I think give them insights. And certainly, yeah, again, the IC, everyone has their roles and responsibilities. Those combatant commanders have access to that information, and folks on their teams who can help them with that.
Yeah, I'm thinking through this a little bit. Maybe it's my Georgetown nature, as I'd love to disagree with you a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of SFS still in both of us, but I'm thinking, well, I can see with new tools and explosions of data on the battlefield, the desires for omniscience from the combatant commanders will increase, expectations will increase. Every commander is going to want their agent as agentic AI agent to do something more on these data systems. So I was about to propose, like, wow, I wonder if the nature of that intelligence warfare is changing on the DIA side. But then I'm thinking, wait a second. On the political side, it's fair to say, proudly so, for the leaders of that function, disruptors, new changes, revisions to modifications to national defense strategies and things like it. The political unprecedented times is reaching levels of new demand. So maybe actually all of it is seeing some nature of disruption. Is my hunch on the outside, and curious about what's going on the inside.
Yeah, I think all of us, just like on the outside too, everyone's trying to figure out how can I best leverage this technology safely and securely. You don't want to leverage something and then have created a vulnerability for you or the system just because of the risk involved. So, yeah, I think in some ways we're all advancing together. And this ties in, Ian, to one point I would like to make, if it's all right, is as we look at how do we ensure going forward that the United States is able to deter adversaries? And I think in a way, this is not, we used to talk about combined arms. We used to talk about joint war fighting. We talk about whole of government. I think it's really even bigger than that. I think in a way it's got to be whole of nation and potentially whole of like-minded nations if we're going to deter the adversaries out there in a way that makes them think, you know what, that now's not the time. And to unpack that a little bit further, so think obviously you've got US government, you've got all the IC, you've got all the branches, frankly, of government, but then you have industry, right? This is, we're seeing a closer relationship, especially in the last year and a half or so, between defense industry and industry in general, private sector in general. I think that's going to have to continue. Academia is going to have to be part of that equation. The labs have to be part of that equation. This is going to be kind of all hands on deck. And normally the United States is really good at that only after we get punched in the face. Hard. So the question is, how do you create without being overly alarmist, but how do you kind of orient? And this is what I saw in UAE, this is what I saw in Ukraine, this is what I saw in Israel, right? They have this sense of purpose going back to,
You got punched. Yeah.
yeah, they either got punched or they recognize that history has not been their friend.
Yeah, they may have gotten punched 80 years ago, but they got punched and it's still in their culture and that sense of purpose.
Yeah. Or the sense that I live really, really close to a threat that if I can't counter time now, then the pact I have with my people is, at risk, for instance. So
I share that optimism. I also I want to build on that and say part of our competitive advantage as a nation happens to be in that area of builders and tech. We have a few export economies, storytelling, maybe some aspects of collegiate education. The world still wants to go to our best universities, and another one is tech. And tech is having a surge right now, economically, nationally. We are an exporter of some of these AI type systems. There's a reason most of them, strangely, seem to once again be found in Silicon Valley, despite other geographies trying to make fun of that area, which I may live in. Lo and behold, rents are up, and everyone wants to move here for these new jobs all of a sudden. Funny how that works. But anyway, like we have a strength there. And just to draw back to your earlier point, Keith, about Ukraine's strengths in that tech leadership that they recognize and invested behind, we have that here too. And I think it would be irresponsible not to call upon that, perhaps from an industrial, private sector, commercial sense, for I'll call it responsible patriotism into supporting what you just said on that mission, because it happens to be part of what makes us stronger.
yeah, I think so. And I would appreciate kind of your thoughts because it seems like Silicon Valley was one universe and then Washington, D.C. was another
Yeah,
universe.
yeah,
A long, long period of time.
yeah.
Even in my short time out of uniform, I've been I've been encouraged to see that these worlds are merging in a way that I think they need to merge, to my point about it's kind of all hands on deck point.
Well, sir, I have so many more questions about your time in service, but I want to draw it to a close here and just thank you for your reflections and your look back on your many years of service. We'll post these in all the right places. Is it okay for folks that have questions and want to engage? Can they follow up with you on the LinkedIns and the like? Is that the right place to go?
Absolutely, and thank you for the time. As I tried to frame it for General Grinkovich, who took over UCOM, I try to frame it kind of the three areas, the three Ds, as I called them. This is defense, and we're seeing this, the counter UAS defense, especially in the context of, I think, the administration's priority, which I think is an important one, the Golden Dome side of it. Now, and this also ties to the sense of urgency is the homeland is no longer a sanctuary, right? We had that for a long time. I don't think we can expect that going forward. I think data is the other D, and you know this, better than I do probably. Just that was an eye opener in Ukraine is the millions and millions of hours of data from the different sensors and what you then do with that data to train the future models to make sure you're in a better place to help drive AI. And then the third one is the DIB. This is the defense industrial base. And that's been an underlying theme, I think, of our conversation. We've got to get in a better place. And I think the way we get in that better place is the primes have the role, absolutely. But there's got to be a lot underneath that is aggressive and driving and responsive and innovative. And I think I'm seeing that. I just we've gotta hustle.
Well said. I just want to make sure I captured defense, DIB, and data.
Data.
Industrial base and data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should do a deeper dive in each one of those one by one. I think well summarized, but I also am just hungry for more coaching and training as to what else could be done in those areas. And it sounds like with those years of leadership here, from clearly the passion of your words and describing it, it sounds like you're still active in the community, which I may know privately, but it's good to hear you share out with the world. Well, thank you for this quick review of a wonderful years of service, Keith. Thank you so much for the time and for sharing your stories here.
Thank you, Ian.